I'm still testing. I can hear myself. Okay. I am honored to be here today along with a few others. John Bauer and Ann Carriere are some of the folks, as well as a few others that are sitting in the congregation here, who have been a part of an unfolding journey around truth-telling and our racial history here at Grace St. Luke's. And we wanted to begin to share some of this work and the ongoingness of it and the invitation to join us, to give some history on how we got started here, how it's been, where we're going, and to take time for some questions as well. We're going to share through John some wonderful archive work that's been done. Ann's going to share about some of her experiences reaching out to a particular church. And all of this is around our particular parish history. As separate churches, as Grace Church and St. Luke's Church, as well as when we came for the merger together to become Grace St. Luke's Church. But before all that, I would like to begin us with a prayer. It's a prayer for humankind. So I invite you to still yourself. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. God of all humanity, you call us to bring about healing and wholeness for the whole world, for women and men and all people of all races and cultures and creeds. Help us to respond to a world that is groaning under the weight of injustice and broken relationships. Remind us that differences are a gift and interdependence a strength from the same creative God. Strengthen us to resist the forces that encourage polarization and competition rather than understanding and cooperation. We know that your reign is not built on injustice and oppression, but on the transformation of hearts, new life, not just reordered life. So teach us forgiveness, O God, bring us reconciliation, and give us hope for the future. We pray in Jesus' love. Amen. Amen. So, my microphone's kind of going in and out.
Yeah, switch to a handheld.
Okay. I know that can be distracting. Let's try that. Get to practice being a game show host. Okay. Or a jazz singer. I don't know which is better. So, again, our hope today is to share some of the unfolding work that a growing group of members have been doing to better learn our church's history, particularly around our racial history. So the overview of our time will have me sharing a little bit about context, how we got here, a bit about beloved community and what we mean by that, and then how our gatherings have been. We've had 3 gatherings so far. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. The third one is actually today. And then John's going to share some of the history that he and others have been doing around archive work, both in the diocese as well as here at Grace St. Luke's. And Ann's going to share some more of her journey as well. So these gatherings, we met first in December 11th of 2022. And I don't think it was a mistake that we gathered in Advent, because something happens, I think, with beginnings and new seasons and new life, and we're growing something and birthing something, and light is becoming brighter and deeper understanding is coming forth. So I don't think it was by mistake at all that the Spirit had us gathering on the 11th of December. We met February 5th as well. And then today is our 3rd gathering, and you all are most welcome to gather with us after the 10:30 service. We gather in the lounge. But our mission, of course, here at Grace St. Luke's is to seek to be a community of hope, belonging, and healing. And that is what this group has been trying to do, to live into our community of hope, making sure we better understand our history of belonging and how there have been times where not everybody felt like they were welcome and belonged, and then to see what we can do to heal. This happens through becoming more intentional as beloved community. It's about doing some deeper work around truth-telling and owning our history. We have been and been trying to be, as a group, honest about any truth that we may find, and it's not been a time to shame, but to claim. To take responsibility for our past so that we can better own and name our present and our future, so that we can live more deeply into our mission of becoming a community of hope, belonging, and healing. This is an unfolding journey. We don't have a timeline for it. In other words, we have not said it will begin on this day, even though I can say it began on the 11th officially in that way. We don't know where we will end and when it will end, but it's ongoing. And we hope that more and more people will want and become a part as they hear about it and think about their connections to Grace Church, to St. Luke's Church, and our merger as Grace St. Luke's Church. There's been a lot we've been learning, and we've been respectful and honoring of all the history we have. It takes courage. It's also hopeful. It's challenging, and it's incredibly spirit-led. And those are some of the adjectives that have come about as we've gathered and concluded our time about what kind of imagery and adjectives are speaking to you in our time together. So our time has been spent on archive work with the diocese. We've been down at the diocese doing archive work, especially John Bauer. We've been doing work here through the parish, through our gathered messengers that go all the way back to St. Luke's, to Grace, and to Grace St. Luke's. They're bound. Did you know this? And you could go back to as far back how? John, remember? Andy, y'all remember? Who's in here? Sally would know.
60s, 61.
In the 60s. So you've been looking at the 60s especially, right? Sally's in the group as well. So, yeah. So this has been a time, too, of not only paper and research that way, but we're also hoping to gather names, and we have an ongoing list of names of folks that we want to interview, personal, in-person interviews about their stories and their history when it comes to Grace Church and St. Luke's Church, you name it. All have been grounded, though, with our questions and our purpose around beloved community and the pillars of beloved community. So I want to say a little bit about that. What do we mean when we say beloved community? I don't know if anybody can define the term beloved community. Is anybody willing to define beloved community? I didn't think y'all would be. But that's okay, because we've used it enough that I want to make sure, if we keep using it, that we know what we mean. But the definition is associated with the philosopher Josiah Royce, but it's to denote an ideal community. Used frequently, this term by Dr. Martin Luther King, around a community that's one of justice, of peace, of harmony, which of course is achieved, as he knew and tried, through nonviolence. So that's what we mean by beloved community, where poverty, hunger, homelessness are not tolerated, racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, prejudice are replaced rather with an inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. Disputes will be resolved through peaceful conflict. It doesn't mean at times things might not or might get a bit uncomfortable, but that love is at the heart and justice is as well. So the core value of beloved community is agape love. Agape love. And one of the grounding scriptures, it comes from Mark when it comes to beloved community. The first of all is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. The Lord is one, that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. It's one that we probably know, but one that we have to continue to live into deeply, intentionally, and with care. So becoming beloved community is not to be understood as a set of programs or ideas, but it's to be a journey. That's a word that we say a lot in many forms, but certainly with beloved community. It's a way of commitment, and it comes in so many forms. But how we came, as this team and this group came, was particularly through the gathering that's now taken place twice. Twice in the fall now. Last year in the fall, and this year in the fall, through Sacred Ground. Now those that are in the group are not all from Sacred Ground, but this 11-week series, once upon a time 10-week, and now 11-week, is one that asks questions and has much learning to do around our American history, around race and prejudice and white supremacy, not only around African American history, but Asian American, Pacific Islanders, Latinx, and our journey. And then it asks at the end, so where do we go from here? What's next? We don't, in other words, just say we take this learning and then shelve it metaphorically and put it on a beautiful shelf and then keep it there. What do we do with this? And so this gathering, this group, this team that is a working team and unfolding in this work around racial identity has come about through some of those intentional questions about going deeper in becoming a beloved community. So with that, I want to make sure that everybody has this. Does everybody have this? Good. Does everybody know that we have a labyrinth? We have a labyrinth, and we've started to use it more and more. And you're going to see it wonderfully being used by different ministries here soon. I think Children and Family Ministries coming up first in April. But the labyrinth is kind of a visual, if you will, for beloved community. And I love the labyrinth. If you can see it, it's right there. A smaller version of it is there at the top of the page. It's thought of kind of to be divided up into 4 quadrants. Truth-telling, proclamation, formation, and justice. So using this imagery in those 4 kind of delineations, the team has really started to unpack these areas, particularly as we've been focusing on racial reconciliation, healing, and justice around truth-telling. And that's one of the first ones, although you don't have to go in a particular order. But each one, if you look at this sheet, and I'm not going to go through it entirely, unpacks truth-telling, proclamation, and proclaiming the dream of beloved community, formation, meaning how we practice the ways of Jesus' healing love, and justice. So what do we do now? How do we repair those places that are still broken, that are still hurting? And how do we become God's feet and hands in the world? So on each page, you can see kind of the unpacking around truth-telling and proclamation and formation and justice. And we have been focusing, as I mentioned, on the truth-telling piece right there. And some key questions centered around our baptismal promise is, will you persevere resisting evil? And whenever we fall into sin, repent and return to the Lord. Some of our core questions that are larger and that we've been drilling down and mining begin from these 3 that come underneath it, around racial, cultural, and ethnic groups, who are in our church, who is around in our communities, who is not in our church, and what racial, cultural, and ethnic groups have historically and predominantly shaped our common life and worship. And where have we excluded, or embraced the presence and power of different racial, cultural, and ethnic groups? I really recommend, if you want to take the time, all of these opportunities that are under each are links. And if you go to the website where this comes from, and the website resource is on the back page, it's on the National Church's website, Episcopal Church, .org/beloved community. It will take you to the site. All of those underlined in purple are links, and there's an amazing amount of resources for children and youth, for adults, for prayer, for you name it. There's even, I wish I had more time, but I'm going to turn it over to John here soon. There's information particularly around data for your neighborhood and who are your neighbors, and the church has done that. It's fascinating and important work. Study your neighborhood data. You can see that under truth-telling. It's a lot of really interesting information. The vestry has done some work, not this term, but around the racial justice audit that was done by the National Church. So there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to unpack. But I'm going to pause here and say it's been a gift to be present to it with all of you and with those that have gathered and those that are yet to be. So we want to spend some time sharing, and we hope that you'll be interested in perhaps asking us questions, coming and joining us. We'll be publishing things in terms of communications with the messenger, because we want all of this to be very transparent and invitational, because it is indeed holy and hard and beautiful and courageous work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John if you're ready.
Thank you. I'm going to give a basic overview of Grace Church and then St. Luke's Church, and then a little bit about some areas where we where we merged the two. Grace Church began in 1852 as a small mission of Calvary Parish. They met above an oyster saloon, which during the week was actually used as a billiard hall. So this was on Union Avenue between Main and Front Street. And this location burned a few years later and destroyed all the church's records. The church had 2 rectors die during the yellow fever epidemic. During William Page Case's rectorship in 1885, they bought a plot of land at Vance and Lauderdale, which had a wooden structure on it which served as the church. Reverend George Patterson succeeded Mr. Case in 1886. The wooden church was destroyed by fire and they lost the records again. Reverend Patterson came at that point and Reverend George Patterson succeeded Mr. Case in 1886 and he died in 1901. Reverend Granville Addison became rector, and the church decided to build the present stone structure that was completed in 1906. That is actually still there. In 1916, Reverend Troy Beatty became rector for 3 years, and he was succeeded by Reverend Charles Wright, who helped build the main building for the church's school. He was rector until 1932. Reverend William Gary was called as rector in 1938 after having 3 years without a rector. Shortly after his arrival, the Memphis government announced plans to build a, quote, Negro slum, unquote, across the street from the church. By the way, that phrase was actually used in an article in the Commercial Appeal, where they were reporting on the fact that Grace Church was being sold, and that was the reason, because the Memphis Housing Authority had decided to build a Negro slum across the street from the church. Just as an aside, it's curious to me that at that time, the building of public housing for blacks was automatically referred to as a Negro slum. So the church congregation decided to sell the church to Mount Nebo Baptist Church, which is a black church. They had planned to build a new building, but the bishop advised them not to, and they merged with St. Luke's Parish in this building in 1940. St. Luke's Church was founded as a mission of Calvary Church in 1888. 10 years later, it became an independent parish. Their first meeting as a church was in the home of Captain C.A. de Salsere on Idlewild Street, 4.5 miles from Main Street. They eventually bought a plot of land on Union and Idlewild with the help of Calvary Church, who actually held the deed. They built a church there, again with the help of Calvary. The cornerstone was laid by Bishop Thomas Gaylor in June of 1894, and the first service was held in September of that same year. That kind of boggles my mind that they built the church between June and September. Pretty fast. However, they were determined to become independent of Calvary, and eventually at the convention in 1898, they were granted independent status as a parish. During the tenure of Reverend Holly Wells as rector from 1906 onward, the church realized that they needed more space because the community around them had grown so much. They purchased land on Peabody and Lemaster, right here, of course, and began construction of that building in 1912. Reverend Wells announced that he was a pastor and not a builder, and so he resigned. Dr. Edmonds Bennett became rector, and the cornerstone was laid. In September of 1913, the church was completed and the first services held. Several short-term rectors served until Dr. Charles Hale became rector in 1930, and he was rector when the merger occurred in 1940. In July of 1940, the bishop wrote a letter to the St. Luke's vestry about merger. On July 8, 1940, the bishop sent a letter to the wardens and vestry of St. Luke's Parish, stating that he has requested that they meet with him that evening to discuss the merger of St. Luke's and Grace Church. Eventually, he heard about the meeting that the two vestries had had the year before, but he was not officially told anything about it. He indicated that at that time, he would have passed it to the convention without any recommendation. But now things had changed, especially in the world at large, and he suggested that they seriously consider the merger. He considered, quote, the proposed merger is wise and an absolute necessity, unquote. He explained that the merger request must come from Grace Church, but the terms of the merger have to be provided by St. Luke's Church. He also met with Reverend Hale, the rector of St. Luke's, and he agreed to become the associate rector of the merged church. The bishop indicated that the two committees meet in late June to discuss the merger, and they agreed to do so, and they drew up a plan of action. The bishop then outlines what must happen for the merger to occur. Having done this, he turned his attention in the final 2.5 pages of the letter to addressing the financial problems of St. Luke's Church. Evidently, they had not fulfilled their financial obligation to the diocese for the past 18 years. For example, in 1938, they pledged $500 to the diocese, but they only gave them $125. So he basically says that this cannot continue, and he dresses them down rather strongly. So, the proposed plan for the merger. There were 11 points that they outlined when the two vestries got together, and I'll just read them to you. 1, the parishes should merge and be called Grace and St. Luke's Parish. Note they hadn't put a hyphen in there yet. I don't know when that came. 2, Mr. Gary, the rector of Grace Church, would become the rector. 3, Dr. Hale would become the associate rector, and the salaries of both rector and associate would always be the same. 4, the parish house should be completed by adding 1 full story. 5, the memorials and chancel and sanctuary furnishings, as well as the stained glass windows from Grace Church, will be put in St. Luke's Church on Peabody. 6, a chapel should be added to the east of the chancel, and the altar from St. Luke's Church should be placed there. 7, services are to be held, preaching to be done, and duties to be performed will be arranged by the 2 priests. 8, the organ of St. Luke's Parish will be expanded using pipes from Grace Church as deemed possible. 9, the present organist and choirmaster of St. Luke's Parish should be retained, and the boy choir should continue. 10, the merger should take place as soon as possible. 11, the debt on St. Luke's Church should be paid upon the merger. Excuse me a minute. I'm going to skip to the early 60s. Some of you have a handout of the Grace St. Luke's Church Messenger This is from 1964. It was written by Reverend Brinkley Morton.
Can you show it, John, so everyone can see it? Can you lift it up?
There are several on the tables. I didn't put any on the chairs. I ran out. But I'm going to read it, so if you don't have it, that's all right. Reverend Morton became rector in 1962, and this is a messenger from 1964. And the title of it is, "Let the Church Be the Church." He says, "The winds of change are blowing with hurricane intensity, and the whole fabric of American society is involved in the upheaval of racial unrest. Strident voices of bitterness overpower the gentle words of reconciliation and compassion. The urgency of Christian charity is crushed by the juggernaut of social revolution. And the church, which ought to be the reconciler and instrument of Christ's love and concern, has been manipulated into the political arena." Archbishop William Temple said, "The church may tell the politician what ends the social order should promote, but must leave to the politician the precise means to that end." It seems to me that the church is quite too much concerned with political action and the issuing of statements on what the government should and should not do. Many pronouncements and activities of the National Council of Churches embody the very course of action which seems to me to be beyond bounds. There exists throughout the land among the Christian proponents of immediate reversal of cultural patterns a certain air of holier than thou, which seems to impute base motives to all who do not demonstrate, sit in, and agitate. Little recognition of the earnest efforts of the Southern churchmen and clergy to be instruments of reconciliation is given, and no fair estimate is made of the tremendous accomplishments made at local levels in this part of the nation. Our Lord himself declined the mantle of a political revolutionary, and such is not the role of the church today. Our task is to proclaim the coming of God's kingdom, to preach the salvation which comes by faith in the risen Christ, and to feed the sheep. We should be more attentive to the souls of our brethren than to their votes. If our government were competing with us for the souls of men, we would react loudly with a reminder of the covenant of the separation of church and state. And yet, Christianity, on its part, seems to be meddling in the mechanics of political affairs. If we change the hearts of men, then what will we follow will surely be applied to Christianity. We are dissipating our manpower and resources on the shifting sands of politics. And instead of crying exclusively for man-made justice, we ought to be pleading for God's mercy upon us all as sinners, whose only hope lies not in laws, but in Christ. So according to Reverend Morton, we as a church are not to get involved in promoting social change, even if it involves hundreds of years of injustice toward a given population in our country. In my way of thinking, that is precisely what we are called to do. And I think Jesus showed us the way many, many times. One other thing that I discovered in my research is that Brinkley Morton, who came to Grace St. Luke's in 1962, actually resigned as rector at the end of 1972. He was going to return to the law, which is what he did before he became a priest. Interestingly enough, he didn't give a reason for his resignation. And he even suggested that the speculations that were swirling around the congregation, you can imagine how that goes, after his announcement were entirely wrong, but he still didn't give a reason for why he was leaving. Further interesting in this story is the fact that the search committee for the new rector, invited him to a meeting in December of '72 and asked him to reconsider and return to the rectorship. He did that, and he talked to his wife that evening, and he called the chair of the committee the next day and agreed to come back in January. So he was gone for exactly 2 months. No reason was given for either resigning or coming back 2 months later. If anyone has any further information on this piece of history, I would love to hear it. Finally, I have heard comments about a sermon that he gave the Sunday after Dr. King was assassinated, that it was confrontational regarding the entire civil rights movement, and especially in regards to Dr. King himself. We have not been able to track down the sermon itself, so again, if anybody has firsthand knowledge of it, I would like to know the details. Finally, I just wanted to add a personal comment. It has been a very eye-opening experience for me, looking into the history of both churches before and after the merger. It has given me a much more greater understanding of our church as well as our city. And I appreciate being able to do the work. Thank you.
I can tell you.
Bring it on, man.
Let's see. Well, I can tell you. I'm looking around. All right, Edith, you were here in those days. Do you remember the sermon?
No.
Who else? Was anybody else here?
I was here, but.
A child.
A child.
Baby. I was fresh out of college. I could show you where I was sitting in the pew. And he said, as I remember, he said, he's talking about the march that the clergy from all over the city made to Henry Loeb's office. You're familiar with that. And Dean Dimmick led the procession with the cross. Anyway, Brinkley thought that was totally out of bounds, totally inappropriate for the church to be doing such a thing. And that's what he said. And I thought to myself, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna stand up right now and leave. But there were 4 people sitting to my right. And I thought to myself, my mother would think that was rude if I got up and left the middle of the sermon. So I sat through it. But that was the beginning of Grace St. Luke's response to our community. After that, we got involved. The catalyst of it all was John Dillard's mother. She was a saint and an actor. Lee, and you remember her. She and her daughter Ann and I got together and decided what one thing we could do. And then we told Brinkley. We just told him that we were gonna have a clothes closet in a inner city school. And he said, fine, because he was not involved. And so, anyway, I'm not going to dwell on Brinkley more. I want to talk about Bill Trimble, because in this mid-70s, things changed. Thankfully, Bill Trimble took John Dillard to the country club. This is so typical of that era. Took him to the country club to ask him over lunch if he would chair something called the Outreach Committee. And so John did. And they began to do more than charity work. Charity work is given to those poor people. is taking care of them. And that attitude of oh, how awful their life is, and we need to respond. There's nothing wrong with that. We're still doing that. Here's the soup kitchen, and the more than a meal is taking care of people, but that's where we were. There was no other thought of advocating for change. We sort of thought this is the way the world is, it's always going to be that way. We're just going to have to put Band-Aids where we can. And that's what we did for a long time. We began to give money out of the church's budget. $2,000, I remember one year. $2,000 from our budget we gave to the newly formed MIFA. And, but we had no idea what MIFA was doing, and really, that was their business, but it was good. So we had no involvement of people in anything that had to do with change in the system. We did that kind of work for years. We did have, I'll talk about the partnership, and I want to talk about Mary Linda Wardlaw, who single-handedly had a passion for refugees, and we sponsored a family that came as refugees and did some good work to get them started here. And that was a wonderful effort that really changed their lives because we got involved. We weren't just giving money. I would say it's to research what we had done with Second Congregational Church, and I tell you what, this was in the 80s, and nobody's around anymore that was involved in that. I've checked with people from Grace St. Luke's, and I've checked with people from Second Congregational, and nobody remembers what we did. I remember preaching at Second Congregational, which is right across from Lemoyne Owen. At that time, it was a thriving congregation. Now it's down to about 10 members. But at that time, it was packed, and a lot of people from the college were members. Anyway, I want to tell you that to preach to a black congregation is wonderful. You really feel like you're Billy Graham. It was a joy for me. And their rector came here and preached at SWAT. We had a dinner, I remember, but really nothing much came of it. I left and he left, and so it just sort of didn't continue, unfortunately. I have recently met the new rector there, who's a woman my age, and she is a pistol. And so I'm hoping that she's going to build back that congregation, because mostly it's elderly people that need to sort of start over. Now, I cannot tell you how, I know, I want to mention one more thing. Before Micah, there was an organization in Memphis that was the precursor, that was the first time I was ever involved in the black community. We were members. Grace St. Luke's was a member. I remember it cost $4,000 to join it, and that was a huge hurdle. This is in the 80s. But we did, and we were active in it. I met lots of black clergy that I had never had any awareness of at all. Worked with them on projects. It was like Micah in that it had efforts to get people together in grassroots ways to take a stand on changes that need to be made, and to hold people accountable in the government. Here we were talking to the government. Oh, Brinkley Morton would have died. but anyway, that project, the whole project was wonderful, but I moved away, and I don't know what happened to it. I guess it just sort of fizzled out. But then Micah has come along to take its place. It's wonderful. So, that's all, I don't know, that's what we've done.
Can you share about sacred ground a little bit?
Oh, sure, yeah. I was a participant in the, I guess, one of the first groups of Sacred Ground. Excuse me. You know, I had read a lot of books about racial injustice, but I had never seen the documentaries that they showed in that series. The reality of, you know, pictures speak a lot of words, and those documentaries from PBS and other places are just eye-opening, and I guess mind-changing is the way to put it. They really say to me, you know, you have to be involved. You just have to do something, and it was great to know that people are interested in Sacred Ground. This is a national thing. I've talked to people in other cities who do Sacred Ground. It's wonderful to be a part of that. Do you all know how it works yet? No? Lana, come in. You want to talk about it? We met, as she said, for 11 weeks or 10 weeks. And it was we'd watch a documentary or we have homework to read parts of books, and then or articles, a lot of articles about what's going on, and the awfulness of the Indian reservations, or just what you just aren't aware of. So then we discuss it. We have some way to process that with the people in our little group. We got lots of time to talk about our own experiences of racism. I don't think I knew how entrenched racism is in our systems, in all of our systems. It's just like, I mean, I didn't know that men coming back from World War II, black men could not get the GI Bill. And the difference that made was huge. They had no way to build up equity, to have any inherited wealth after that. They just, like cutting off their legs. So I mean, that was just one eye-opening thing. I think Sacred Ground is the kind of thing I wish everybody in this room could do, because it's just making you aware of how life is. It doesn't pull any punches. How life is, that we just haven't seen, haven't noticed, haven't been aware of.
Don't go far, because we want to have a little bit of time for question and answers for anybody who might have them. So hopefully we've generated some good questions for you all and have you intrigued. I will add something more to what John was saying earlier about Brinkley Morton and that time. We became the largest parish on the diocesan archives and books in the Diocese of Tennessee, because we were just one diocese at that time, the Diocese of Tennessee, beginning at that time. Our membership was the largest in the entire diocese, soon after Martin Luther King's assassination. That's telling and historical, and sitting with that for the reasons why and the messages that were going out at that time. So that's something to name and to own and to know a bit about our history as well. So you've probably heard a lot of new and maybe some familiar history as well. But do you have questions? Are there things that you want to plumb a little further? Do you have ideas? Lily.
Didn't Brinkley Morton become Bishop of California?
Yes, we sure did. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Did y'all hear Lillian ask, didn't Brinkley Morton become a bishop of California? The whole, I don't, was it a particular area, or was it all of San Diego? Thank you, Ann. Yes, that's exactly right, Lillian.
And this question, when I used to go to the Helen shop,
Uh-huh.
which was over
Yep.
on Union.
Mm-hmm.
Was that Grace Church or St. Luke's Church was built around?
St. Luke's.
St. Luke's.
St. Luke's.
Because
Yep.
you could go inside the Helen shop and you could see where the church was.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. So another hand going up. Okay. Ellie.
I don't know if this is true or not, but I have heard that Bishop Morton said later that the way he handled the civil rights movement was one of his biggest regrets. I don't know if anybody can confirm that.
Do you remember where or how that might have been shared?
I don't.
Okay. Because those are the things, like that's one of the reasons we want to keep sharing and communicating what we're finding, because I mean, the history is in us, right? The documents are there, but they're only a part, so the history is in us. So if you think you know folks that might know some of these answers to the questions.
But he did come back here, and this was his church before he passed away.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
So, Laura, I want to clarify what you said about one thing, and that is, was Grace St. Luke's growth as a result of the civil rights movement under Brinkley a result of like-minded people with Brinkley? Yes. Similar to after the New Hampshire bishop was installed, many Grace St. Lukers ended up at St. John's for the same reason.
I think it's not a stretch to infer some of those things, particularly, I mean, I hear what you're saying about St. John's and that history as well, but to go back to ours and Brinkley Morton, I think you can infer some of those things.
The other thing I would affirm is that under Joe Porter, we ended up going to Haiti. We ended up making Grace St. Luke's part of the mission to make us a companion diocese. Not that it went anywhere greatly, but
We still are companions with Haiti.
we attempted to be part of that ministry. And I think the whole purpose of Sacred Ground is more to change our hearts than to impose charity on somebody else. This is all about learning who we are and what our call to ministry is.
There is a difference and similarity and overlap between justice and outreach, to be sure. And we heard a lot of outreach coming up from some of this time. Did you hear? That's certainly something that we're learning and seeing, and I think many of you, I can tell you nodding, and that's something to be aware of in terms of our history. You know, to the point around what you're saying, Ruthie, about justice and changing our hearts and outreach and systems, when we think about the care that's needed immediately, I mean, clothing those that are needing clothes, feeding those who are hungry, that's an immediate response. We're called to do that, right? We are. But the question around justice is, how did we get there in the first place? What are the systems in place and entrenched in ways that have us in a system and a politic in a way? Because politics really means, politically means systems. And Jesus, y'all, was a political figure. He was all about busting systems. He was all about that, all about that. Sometimes I think people get mixed up between politics and partisan. And Micah and our church does not endorse particular candidates and say, vote for this person and here's why. There's an important reason, separation and things. That's partisan. Political is much bigger in terms of those ways. And we see Jesus, especially in these upcoming weeks, all about busting that system, right? That's my candid words, busting the system. But y'all know what I mean, I believe. Those ways that are not allowing all persons to be their full, beautiful human selves. The ways in which we compartmentalize and say, no, you will behave in this shape, way, or form because of what you believe, because of what you look like, because of where you come from. Jesus was about none of that. Jesus was about all of us together. So talking about changing hearts, Ruthie, talking about caring for those who are ill, sick, hungry, and needing to be clothed. It all works together. And our history is deep and rich and wide and challenging and beautiful. We've got a few folks in here who are also in the group. I don't know, I want to give you a chance to say anything if y'all would like. And we just have a few more minutes, but I don't want to put anybody on the spot if you're not ready. I just want to make sure you have that opportunity. And also if there are more questions.
I was talking to someone last night at a party who described himself as a lapsed Catholic married to a lapsed Jew. And I was saying something about being Episcopal, and he was like, "Oh, Episcopal, that's nice and liberal." And like, meant it, as a compliment. Like, "Oh, that seems like a great place to be, because it's just nice and liberal." And I don't still totally understand the Episcopal Church's kind of, our path to an identity where someone casually would describe us as nice and liberal. Like, I feel the same way. I think it is, it's described as the church for thinking people, and I don't know if there's something that happens when you really think and pay attention and see that just leads you, and again, I want to be sensitive about political partisan, but leads you to, I don't know, a just different worldview about yourself, your place in the world, and the others around us, and how we can care for them. But, especially knowing our fundamental, attachment to a kind of patrician, Anglophilic, maybe a more staid or traditional, kind of what, in the briefest way, how has this, when did that happen that we kind of evolved into what I think can be broadly seen as a more liberal denomination, or whatever the right word is to put in right there? And please tell me if I'm not quite making sense, but is that something from the 70s? Is that something, oh no, and then, it sounds like we were, everyone wasn't necessarily, I just don't understand kind of when that came to be broadly or possibly stereotypically true.
So you're asking the question of when it came to be that there was a perception, such as your colleague or friend named that you're in the Episcopal Church, oh, that's liberal. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes.
Okay. I bet if I opened this up to every single person in here, they might have a different answer for that. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing some nodding heads. There might also be some collective agreement in that as well. I wouldn't say personally that there was one thing or one moment in time that has made that possible, but a collection. We've also seen where we've been behind in it as well. John, you want to add to that?
Well, I also think that it depends not just on when things are happening, but also where. I mean, even right now, you can probably look at 5 different Episcopal churches and rate them on a scale of, liberal or conservative, and they'll do this, So it depends on where you are. And what I have observed in the 20 years that I've been here is that this church is probably the most welcoming that I have ever seen as far as a diverse group is concerned. I mean, we immediately welcome blacks and gays and just all varieties, and I find that to be very energizing. So that's part of the reason that we're here.
I think that nationally, the Episcopal Church was way ahead of Tennessee or Memphis in race concerns. And I want to give credit to Charles Crump, who was an active member of this diocese. He was a member of Holy Communion Church. He was on the national level. He was
Executive Council.
And so he was exposed, I guess you'd say. But he brought new thinking to this diocese. He, I wasn't alone, certainly, but for me, he was the one who led the way, which says to me, one person can make a difference. One person can be a leader in a new way that drags other people along.
I think we have time for one more question, that's all.
Thank you, and this is actually kind of follow on to that because I was trying to understand from a clarification standpoint. So when Reverend Morton was here, this was a very, we're hands off politically. And then Reverend Ann, it sounded like, said that somewhere in the 70s that changed. So was it this other person you're talking about that was the catalyst for that change? Because it sounded like people were coming here because they didn't want to be involved politically, and this was just what I'm understanding from it, that people were coming here because, oh, I don't want to get involved in the civil rights movement, I don't want to think about it, so I'm going to come here, but then something changed, so.
Right. The rector changed, and he was, he was going to change, he was going to lead the way. And then there were people like Mrs. Diller who were ready and wanted change and wanted involvement, I must say.
Did you lose very many members at that time when the change happened? The people that had come to stay out, did they leave?
We're still doing more research. There's more to be done. We don't have all the information yet. There's more to unfold. So if you'd like to unfold that with us, you're guys welcome. Note the plug for all. Because John and Ann, I mean, y'all would agree this has been intriguing, fascinating, holy, hard, and important work, right? And there's more to be done. So we appreciate your care, your curiosity, your desire to know more. And for this conversation. These are important conversations, and we look forward to more. There was two quotations that I wanted to give to kind of wrap up our time. A very wise bishop, who is also a good friend of mine, the Right Reverend Carly Hughes, the Bishop of Newark, was saying to me the other day, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And then James Baldwin, Mr. James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Go with God, good people. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.